This is just so grateful that she's sharing this with us. Hi guys, thanks for joining again. I'm so grateful that she is sharing this with us. Hi. So you were telling about this, the time limit you have for us to do a civil rights, a civil
The civil suit.
yeah.
So there was this federal law called it's called Section 1983. So basically, you have a certain amount of time in which you can file a civil suit against the law enforcement. So I think what's important to stress is that this federal law depends on how the state will dictate how much time you have to press charges or not to press charges, to file a suit. And depending on the state and who you are speaking with or interacting with and trying to file, they could basically say like, oh, you're too late. So I think that's also something people have to understand. And also another reason why it's really hard to charge officers is because they're part of a union. So this union, you typically may have like 1,000, 2,000 police officers attached to it. And the district attorney is the one that's responsible for charging the police officers. But because the district attorney is an elected state official, that means his job or her job basically depends on the votes. So all those police officers and then all their family and friends are mad at this district attorney because now this district attorney wants to press charges. So that's another reason why it is so hard for police officers to get charged. So this is another part of the system that needs to be basically destroyed and built back up from the ground up. So a lot of people may not know that as well. So when I charged my suit, because I charged it right away, it went on as proceeded. And what happens is when you file a civil suit, I had to have a meeting. I don't know if this is what usually happens, but personally, I had a meeting with my lawyer, and we met the prosecutors that was defending the NYPD. And I felt like it was an interview, and I say this, it wasn't an interview, it was a meeting, but I felt like it was an interview because I felt they wanted to get of my personality, how I spoke, feelings on certain, because one of the questions they asked me was like about police officers. And I told them honestly that, me being a woman of color, a Black woman, that I do not place stereotypes because I've had a bad race, that I'm going to now generate an entire race for my one bad experience because they were similar, look similar to that one race. And I was like, that's how I feel about police officers. I not think that all police officers are bad. The bad are running rampant within a system that protects them. So even police officers, that some that may want to speak out, unfortunately are looked at as rats. So if you're not protecting the system and you're not protecting the actions, whether they're good or bad, then it just doesn't matter at the end of the day. So I told him honestly that I do not look at all police officers as bad. But I was like, unfortunately, what happened to me is what happens a lot within Black and brown communities. And I was like, was wrongfully arrested and incarcerated, and I feel that someone needs to pay for those wrongdoings. So after that, I spoke with my attorney, and it maybe like a week later they offered a settlement. So I had a choice where I could have taken it to in front of a jury. But a lot of people also know, if you're familiar with the legal system, taking a case to jury can take years. It actually, like, the minimum amount that it takes is about a year, but it can go on for years. And honestly, Damon, like, what I went through, I just wanted to get it over, get done. And I wanted to start my own healing process. I couldn't imagine thinking about this every single day for a year, up to 2 years or more. But there's things that I'm now more aware of that I wasn't then when I was incarcerated, but unfortunately, yes, that did happen. And also the stigma of being arrested, which is crazy, even
Yeah.
though I didn't do anything wrong. But, you know,
Yeah.
you think about those things, especially along your profession and people knowing
Yeah.
that
You
you're
had him.
arrested.
You were fingerprinted. You were mugshotted. Those are all traumatic things. I mean, so you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, you know, also to realize how lucky I was and knowing that, you know, it could have been much, much, much worse because, you know, as we've all seen, we know how it can turn out in many cases. So, you know, lucky, but that's crazy that you have to feel within a system that's supposed to protect you. But you know, that's what I felt about my case. But you know, I also wanted to mention too as well. You know, a lot of Black and Brown communities. I say this because I had certain advantages going for me. I had an attorney that was willing to bono. I also had some, you know, a bit of a platform. So that was a concern about, you know, me at the time about what was going on because honestly it looked really bad. And the reason why that I was arrested. And, you know, like for instance, everything that's going on with Rayshard Brooks and how he fell asleep in the Wendy's drive-through because they said he was intoxicated and the whole place, and how, you know, eventually the police officer murdered him. I know a lot of people, and this is also Black communities as well, were saying, oh, well, you know, he took the taser and tried to taser the police officer. But before all that happened, when he fell asleep and they made him move his car, so he moved his car into the parking lot. It was very peaceful before before it escalated. But I also encourage people to really, you know different cases and see how a case that involves a Black or brown person versus a white person in that same situation, how it's drastically different. Because, you know, even within Black communities, people are like, oh, well, you know, he should have like took the taser, he should have not have tried to get away. But a lot of times you have to understand when no wind up deputies. I'm sure you've seen this video. He took a baton of deputies and wind up beating them with their own baton and then proceeding to take their police car. And this was a white male. And but during that altercation, the deputies did not pull their weapons out. The only thing they pulled out was the baton, but they didn't pull out their guns. They didn't try to shoot him. And later they found out that Jerry York, this white male, had an extensive criminal history, but he also had mental issues as well. But also, too, the deputies on the scene did not know that he had mental issues. So I just want to stress that point, too, because they didn't know that he had mental issues. But still, the way that they handled him, not knowing any of that, you know, he came out of that situation alive and practically.
Yeah, that video is insane. I've seen that.
What did you say, Damon?
Yeah, that video is insane. I've seen that video. He takes the baton and beats the cops with the baton and then takes their car. I mean, it's insane to me. Insane. And the you know, like you brought up the point, they never once pulled out their guns. Not one time. You mean? So.
Yeah, not once. And, you know, and people are like, oh, well, you know, because Rayshard Brooks they said he was intoxicated and when all this had happened. But then a lot of people don't know the story of a Black woman. Her name's Marquita Reed. And I think this was in 19, I believe. Her name was Marquita Reed. She was a mother. She was a mother of two, a nurse. And a police officer was he was under the influence, which means he was intoxicated, and he drove his police car into a restaurant and unfortunately hit Marquita Reed, who was dining within that restaurant, and he killed her, and he was under the influence. It's the only thing that he was charged UI. So I think when people are talking about like the case of Rayshard Brooks and they're saying, oh, well, you know, certain things he did, he kind of was asking for that. You have to look at the way that police officers treat their own, because, you know, a similar situation happened. He was only charged with a DUI, came out with his life. And, you know, I also always ask people to explore and look at your past and what you've done. How many of you are parents? How many of you like smoked a doobie in front of your, you know, smoked blunt, or, you know, in front of in your backyard, in front of your house during the 70s, and you were like a hippie? Like, imagine getting sent to jail for 15 to 25 years to life for that. Not having the chance to go to rehabilitation, like, having your life being taken away because you fell asleep in a Wendy's drive-through and you were intoxicated. I'm not taking away that you shouldn't be drinking and driving, because my grandmother was killed by a drunk driver. So I understand the severity of that. So that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that, you know, a lot of times when you are Black, brown, you are automatically judged. You are already accused of a crime before they can even, before you can even claim your innocence. And a lot of times this happens and just people aren't aware. Yeah.
Yes. So, okay. So first of all, I want to thank you so much for sharing so candidly and being so, sharing so much information. Lots of people here are learning a lot. They're saying that. So I really appreciate you just being so open and candid with such a traumatic situation that happened to you. I genuinely appreciate, well, I saw you talking to TK. That's how I became familiar with the story. And I was, like everybody, now they're all hearing it for the first time, I was blown away. And that it's such an important story to share. So I appreciate you being willing to share it with me and my people watching. I really genuinely think it's so important that people know these kind of things, because I think they look at you at this, you know, beautiful influencer type girl, not realizing that it can happen to any brown person in America. So thank you. You know, from the bottom of my heart, I appreciate you sharing. But then I also want to talk now, you know, I know you want to talk about your arrested voices lifted, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so tell us about that.
Okay, first, before I say anything, I just want to say thank you so much for having me, Damon. It's really important that we have these conversations, and, you know, a lot of people don't want to talk about it openly and candidly. So it's really amazing you are having this platform where these discussions can continue, because, you know, once the momentum of the protests die, once, you know, people stop posting there and, you know, their virtue, was it this obligatory posts my sister likes to call them, you know, because that's the nature of the world, it works. It's important to keep these conversations going, and without those conversations we can't come up with viable solutions that can create real changes. So I just want to say thank you as well.
Okay, yeah, but, you know, thank you, thank you back, you know, double. I think, you know, again, this is such an important story because, like I said, I think people don't realize that, you know, how it can happen to any brown person in this country. So, I mean,
Right.
and, you know, you're just so open about it and so informative, but also, you know, for such a traumatic thing to happen to be so informative, I really appreciate that. Again, I just said it, but, you know, I love you. And then, you know, so I want to talk about your new, because, you know, my thing is like, you know, I really think that, I don't know what you want to do in the future, but I think you should, you know, really consider, you know, maybe running for office or something. I think you'd be really good at something like that, you know? I'm serious. Like, I think, you know, you really have a great knowledge and great, you know, I think you'd be really good at something like that. You know, you should really pursue something in the field of that. But anyway, tell us about your Arrested Voices Lifted.
Thank you, Damon. Well, for Arrested Voices Lifted, to what I was just saying is that we want to keep the conversation going. So a lot of times when you hear, you know, stories of like Ahmaud Arbery or Breonna Taylor, Rashard Brooks or Eric Garner or Freddie Gray, or, you know, the countless other names that we do not hear about, you never get the full story. A lot of times what you see in mainstream media, to desensitize the public, they'll say like, oh, a Black male was killed by police officers. 9 Black people were, you know, in a bombing. You know, and a lot of times names were not addressed. Like, you know, we'll get the names of before we find out the name of the Black or brown person that was murdered. So I also think it's important that we know the full story of people that have been discriminated or who have been caught and live this life under a systemic racist construct. Like, it's important to know all those stories, because when you know the full story of someone, that's when you can have more empathy. And when you have more empathy, a lot of times it inspires you to take action to create real changes. And that's why I mentioned why systemic racism is so successful, because it hides all those stories. It hides the true history of our country, to keep people complacent. When you're complacent, you don't feel the need that anything needs to change. And a lot of that has to do with bearing the truth and history of what Black and brown people deal with every day in this country. So we want to keep the conversation going, because when you keep the conversation going and you hear the full stories, then you understand that this is something that's it needs continuous change. It's not going to happen overnight. This has been happening for over 400 years in this country, so it's just not going to change overnight.
Yeah, it's not going to change by the end of the summer,
No, exactly.
Wait, I wanted to say one thing before you continue. I sorry to interrupt, but it's so interesting because the news to me is full of it. The news tells you exactly what they want you to know. I've never been a news person. The news gives you such a skewed version, etc. But Instagram has been, for me personally, my #1 source of information during this whole time right now. And I think Instagram is where you are learning all the details and the important parts of things, because there are people like you and lots of people really sharing these things. So Instagram, to me, 4 months ago, we cared about how many followers we had and we cared about posting pictures of ourselves, but now we're all losing followers, myself included, very happily. Please go. Anyone that wants to unfollow me, please do. And
right.
It's only about sharing information right now, which that Instagram has changed so drastically, even in the past month. In a great way. So
yeah, for TK and I, we've never cared about like how many followers we have, or cater our content to because we think it'll get this amount of likes. And I know you're very much like this as well. For us, it was always about like creating content that we felt passionate about, and if people like it and can vibe with it, that's great, and we really appreciate it. But if you don't, you can easily click the unfollow button. Like, I don't like to pressure people. If you want to be part of TK and I say it's our virtual family. I don't even like to say follower, because people take their time to DM us, they comment, and that means a lot to us. So I say thank you to our virtual family. Like you said, I also believe too that Instagram has been like such a great tool in sharing information, but you also have to do your own research, because people can put out false information or may not quite know about the history of the things that they're talking about. So I always encourage people to do their own research, including anything that I say, because that's how I've learned all these things. I don't take one source, I follow multiple sources, but also be careful of the sources and the information that you're getting. Look at the platform, look at the media company that is publishing that article, and then look at the CEOs who are in control and run that publishing media company. You just really have to do your research.
Listen, you're smart. You're a smart cookie. You're right about that. The CEO of the company, that's so smart. You're right. Keep going all the way up the ladder. You're right.
Yes. And and that's the reason why TK and I felt so passionate in starting like Arrested Voices Lifted, because also too, in this digital age, Black trauma is being exposed daily, and the visuals, like Damon, like I hold my stress like here, and I hadn't felt that in like years, because I was consuming so much like visceral violent acts towards Black and brown people, and it literally affected me physically. And as important as I think it is to show all the narrative of these stories as well, because let's face it, these videos also are important, because even with videos, you still have people saying like, oh, well, You know, what did he do to deserve that? What does someone just need to do to deserve to get murdered? But you have people out there saying that. And you know, and you see all the changes that are happening now within the government and regarding things that are becoming reformed and regulations and laws that do not think for one moment in time that that would have happened if all of us collectively weren't out there protesting, weren't out there signing petitions, all the activists on the ground that have been doing this for years and years and years. Do not think for one moment in time that the government all of a sudden was like, oh my gosh, we have a problem, let's start creating changes. They only did that because there was an outrage against the acts that were happening against Black men in this country. And I think some of that also has to do with the pandemic. A lot of people are out of work, and you know, already feelings and emotions are stirring from that, and it's kind of just coupled over with this. But
well, something about the pandemic, which you know, that I noticed right away, which, you know, I feel like, you know, I just want to bring it up, is that, you know, basically, as soon as the nation got quarantined, everything kind of stopped. I felt like, you know, crime wasn't really happening. All these things weren't happening, but police brutality was continuing. It was so obvious to me. It didn't stop. It didn't skip a beat. And there was the one thing to me that was happening probably every day, you mean? And so to me, it was so glaringly obvious that, like, you know, everything realistically did stop. That, you know, for the beginning of the pandemic, police brutality was, you know, business as usual, for lack of better terms. You know what I mean? Like, it was so obvious to me that, you know, this is, you know, but that's just something I noticed right away. You mean, I'm like, that is still going on. Everything else has stopped but that. You mean, so.
yeah, and you know, I think a lot of people need to understand that, you know, these, as I mentioned before, these aren't rare occurrences. What happened to George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. This happens, you know, all the time, and even to young Black and brown children being killed in their own homes by police officers. So I think you know, some of these videos that have came to light just is like a little peek into the lives of marginalized communities, and people just aren't, unfortunately, they're just not aware of this. And so, but like I said, that's the reason why TK and I wanted to start this, because we also didn't want to continue in showing violent imageries, and we also wanted to really show how words can really be powerful. You using your voice and speaking out, because, you know, a lot of times you'll have people say, oh, well, what am I going to do? Like, what can I do? I'm just one person. I don't have a lot of, you know, people on my platform. What's signing a petition? What's making a phone call? What's emailing? What's protesting? What's all that going to do? What can I do? But the question is, not what can you do, but yes, exactly. What can you do? Imagine if every person on this planet was like, I'm going to do something. Collectively together, we are so strong and powerful and can create changes. And that's what you're starting to see now. That's happening with laws that are being regulated and reforms. None of this would have happened if we all remained silent.
You're right.
So I really encourage people to be vocal. And, you know, and TK and I, we just have such a really close relationship, and we've been talking about these issues, you know, forever, before there was even social media. So for us to create, you know, this platform, we just really wanted to show the narrative, because I think the more you get to know someone on a personal level and see their entire story, it can cause you to be more empathetic and really create something that you want to take action and help create change. So that's the reason why we really started this platform, and, you know, also a place of healing, because releasing what you've been holding in, releasing your story can inspire someone else to release theirs. And and then we also want to work with, eventually down the line, with wellness centers and helping some of the cases that we've had, because a lot of times people don't get therapy after the traumatic issue, or because we're not only dealing with police brutality, we're also talking about stories of discrimination and stories of abuse. So it's important to also incorporate the healing.
Well, it's interesting, because I had Judge Karen, she's a friend of mine who's a judge in Maryland, actually. I don't know if you watched that one. And she brought up a really good point. She said that, you know, her son or her grandchild, who's 7 or something, she's white, her grandchild who's 7, let's say him and his friend were playing in her front yard, and the friend got killed, whether it be with a car, run over by a car or shot, whatever, she would take him to therapy immediately that night. She was saying in a lot of the brown communities, that's not even an option. They see their best friend get killed and they're just supposed to go on with their daily life the next day. That's a very, very good point. She brought up a really good point, I thought so.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. But, a lot of times in Black and brown communities, that's just the norm.
Yep. Go to school the next day. Yeah.
It shouldn't be a norm, but
yes,
that is the norm.
Yeah.
And it also makes Black and brown people very strong in a way because we've had to deal with certain things that other races have not had to deal with. But but also on the side effect of that, you're holding all of that stress in, because that's what happens. You internalize it, whether you realize it or not, and it manifests itself in other ways, whether it could be overeating, drinking, heavy narcotic use. Like, it all manifests in some way or another. That's not beneficial to you.
It has to manifest at some point, some way, so.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that was really a good point that she brought up with that. Another thing that I have said several times is that, basically, if a white person says, and I've said this, it's not Black people's responsibility. It's not Black people's responsibility to tell a white person how they can get involved or what they can do right now. It is a white person's job to figure it out. And if they can't figure it out, they're not part of the problem. They are the problem. If you can't figure out a way to get involved in this right now, what's happening in this movement in our country and in the world, you can't find something to do. It doesn't have to be protesting the front line at all. Do something that's going to help this moment in time right now. And if you can't, you are not part of the problem. You are the problem. I've said that. So
right. And a lot of that is taking responsibility and understanding that you have been complacent.
Yeah,
and a lot of times people don't want to take that responsibility because other feelings can come up.
It could be as simple as doing your research, like you're saying. That is a part of supporting this movement right now. Finding out about systemic racism, those kind of things, something like that. And if you don't, a lot of people, you're right, a lot of people don't want to do that. So, they just want to throw money at the problem or whatever, which we've learned, but anyway, that was just my thing,
Right. No, you're absolutely right, Damon. I think a lot of times people don't understand, which is why I had mentioned before about the intentional and unintentional part of being racist within this country. And this is a reason why systemic racism and the construct has been so successful for all these years, is because, it keeps people complacent. And when you're complacent, you don't feel the need to do anything because you've benefited from the system. When you're not close to communities and proximity, which is what we talked about, and being in those marginalized communities and see how it affects those people a day to day to day, then you have no clue, you have no understanding, you have no empathy, because you're living in your own bubble. And, a lot of times people ask like, oh, well, compared to today versus, let's say, like the 1940s or 50s, it's much better, right? And I always like to say, well, yes, in some ways, but it's also transformed. And this is why the racist construct has been so successful. Like, let's say in the 1940s, you were going to apply for a job. The person that's hiring you for that position might say, I'm going to say the word because I think people need to understand it. Like, hey, nigger, you can't work here. But now in 2020, they might say, oh, well, you're overqualified or you're not qualified enough. So we have to realize that the language has changed. So just because the language has changed doesn't mean it has gotten any better. So we just still have a lot more work to be done.
Something that I realized from 13th, and I can't sing its praises enough, is that I did learn a lot from that. Is that basically, because for me, I was curious about what happened after slavery, but before Jim Crow. What happened between, like, those between years? What in the between years before Jim Crow and civil rights movement? Those are really interesting years to me personally. And what happened to me is that they just came up with a more digestible and more acceptable version of systemic racism and oppression to 2020. It hasn't changed. It really hasn't changed much, in my personal opinion. It's basically a more acceptable version and less, like people where people can say, oh, it's better now. It's really not better. That's what I think.
Exactly. It's just the language has changed. And I think people need to understand that, this is also part of the racist construct, right? The systemic racist construct, that it does that. It keeps changing. So it protects the people that are benefiting it the most. So I think once people really do their research, and and it's going to be like a rabbit hole. It's like a domino effect. When you find something, then it inspires you to look at something else. Therefore, but you know, like I said, if you really care about humanity, because, you know, a lot of times people are very open about talking about the environment, very open about talking about abuse against animals. And,
You're
you know,
right.
I said this, that, you know, the whole thing that happened with Amy Cooper and Christian Cooper, and I hate to say this, but I was like, well, luckily, not luckily, because I'm a huge animal lover, but because that dog was also getting abused as well, a lot of people felt more like sympathy, like empathy, like sympathy towards the dog. But I'm wondering if it was just Amy Cooper and Christian Cooper, would that reaction would have been so visceral, because we've seen how Black men are treated in this country,
That's a good
and it's been
question.
happening forever, and no one really cares to speak out or say anything.
Well, the Amy Cooper thing, and you know, that to me, I feel like those people, and I won't even say just women, those people are one of the most dangerous people in America, because you don't really know, you know, like you don't know that they're not an outward racist. You know, a person like Amy Cooper to me is one of the most dangerous people in America, because she has power, and then she's using it to, you know, potentially get a Black man murdered, you know, potentially. So, I mean, that's a very dangerous person to me, and Amy Cooper. You mean, and Amy Cooper, you know,
Yeah.
but
Yes, and I think that was, you know, when everyone saw that, you know, I spoke out about that, and I said that, you know, she knew the power that she had, and, you know, I said, you know, she used her power. It was literally like a weapon.
yep,
And, you know, and this happens daily. I mean, this is just part of her history, and, you know, her as a white woman, this is when I talk about the intentional, when you understand what your part plays within the system. And she was very aware of her power and how she could yield her words to criminalize this man that was not a criminal. And um, and then unfortunately, you know, this happens to Black and brown people all the time. I mean, even when you're simply going to the store to go shopping. I don't know how many times, like Damon, I've walked into the store. I've had my coat on, my purse on my shoulder, my heels on. I'm like 5'10", so I'm already like 6'3" with the heels. And I'll have white women come up to me and be like, "Excuse me, can you tell me where such and such is? Or do you have it in this size?" And, you know, before I used to say something, but as I got older, I felt like, you know what, it's not even worth my time. So I would just look over them like I didn't even hear anything. But these are the little, like, minute things that we have to deal with daily, besides the blatant, brutalizing
yeah,
um, acts that go on in Black and brown communities. It's, you
yeah.
know, little things that happen every day.
So, I guess one last question I'll ask you is, I guess either you can answer either way. Where do you see this kind of, you know, where do you see the changes kind of landing, or where where do you actually see them realistically, you know, the changes happening, or where would you like to see them really realistically changing?
Yeah, I mean, TK and I talk about this a lot, and I mean, honestly, I think it's first about becoming educated, because, as I mentioned before, at the heart of racism is ignorance. So I feel that more that people are educated on actual facts. This is why I really encourage people to know where their information is being sourced. Because you can't trust the first thing that you read or see or hear. Like, you always have to do your research and see if it's coming from a reputable place. So I feel like if eradicating racism, you have to eradicate the ignorance. So you can eradicate the ignorance by becoming more knowledgeable about true history within this country. And usually, when you become informed of the actual world that you live in, a lot of times that can inspire you to take action to create some viable solution or real changes. Because the reality of it is that this is not going to happen overnight. So a lot of people that are talking about they're, you know, fighting the good fight now, but we'll see, you know, where their alliance is, you know, a year, 2 year, 3 years. This is not going to be solved within our lifetime.
Yeah,
Uh, but we can see certain changes, like certain changes are happening right now. And that's because people are using their voice, the activists that are on the ground that have been doing this work for years. Um, the power of us collectively, truly, genuinely caring and wanting to create change, that's what's going to propel us to see changes that are going to affect our children and the next generations, and they're going to be able to benefit from those changes. But also too, people have to be willing to be honest. You see a lot of brands and corporations that are saying, you know, we're taking responsibility, we're doing these things. But you know, you have to acknowledge the wrongdoing that you've done before anything changes. You can't expect to be like, oh, you know, we're going to do this and this and this without acknowledging what you have done in the past to help perpetuate, like to help continue this systemic racism. And if you hire people within those brands and companies, you want to hire people that have been talking about these issues, you know?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
you
yeah,
want
yeah.
to hire a person because they're black or brown.
Yeah.
They have to be passionate and care about these issues, and have to have been talking about these issues, because what's going to happen is that you're going to have brands and companies that are going to hire people just based off the color of their skin. So like, oh, you know, I'm going to hire him or her because he or she is black. But you know, depending on that, who that person is, you also have to understand that they have to be educated about their own history, their own culture, because you have black people in communities that sometimes don't know their own history, don't know their own culture, and that's very important as well. So I think it does start with education, knowing, because that's how you eradicate ignorance.
You're right. I think, yeah, education / ignorance, those are the keys. Not being ignorant.
Right.
Not being ignorant.
Yeah.
All right, my darling. So your, I put in the pin your Instagram, and then your the other Instagram is Arrested Voices Lifted, right? Just at Arrested Voices Lifted. Is there anything else that you want to kind of, you know, either share or promote, or, you know, how can we support any other way that we can support you or TK right now, or, you know what I mean? Besides.
No, I just wanted to say, you know, thank you so much for having me. And, you know, when I see people, you know, they talk about like, oh, you know, because for me, like, I understand we live in a world where some people truly did not know what was going on. And like I said, this is all part of the racist construct to keep people blinded, to keep them complacent. So now some people are becoming awakened. And, you know, like, I want to encourage those people and let them know, like, at the end of the day, technically, we are all one race. You know, we want to go back to scientifics and talk about the first person that was found in Africa and how we all came from that one person, and due to our like different genetics and how we transformed as we like went further and further away from the sun and all the, like, I really encourage people to do their research. So when I talk and say like, oh, you know, a white person, not all white people are the same. There are some very woke and awakened white people. And you know, and that's why, like I said to you, this is one of the reasons why I love what you're doing and opening this platform so we can have these conversations. And I don't know, I'm just really appreciative of you. I know my sister like loves you, and anyone that my sister loves, I know that I love, because my sister's really picky when it comes to, you know, with her who she really loves. And I just love your guys' relationship. And I don't know, just thank you for letting me say what I wanted to say and creating this platform.
Well, you know, again, we just keep thanking each other back and forth, but I want to thank you so much for using your voice in such a way. There's people that use their voice, but you're using your voice in actually a very unique way to me. And it's just, you know, it's so special, and, you know, you're so honest, and so you share so honestly that you know, it's really, really impactful. You know, everybody on here did not know your story, and they were, you know, kind of blown away. And I just really appreciate you using your voice the way that you use it. And then sidebar, yes, I do love your sister very much, and so as a result, I love you the same. Like, it's automatic, guilty by association. I love her, therefore I love you, and we all know it. It's a big blood
Well, that's
fest.
what I was about to say, Damon. I was about to say I love you, TK, because I see her on your comment.
Yeah, no, it's a big love fest, you know, all that around. But, you know, I really do, in all seriousness, really, really, really want to just thank you and tell you how much I appreciate your voice, both your voices. You know, and this specific talk, you know, is really important to me to share this with people. And I think, like I said, I really want my platform right now to be about sharing, because I realized things that I think are obvious, and I'm learning as well, totally learning. It's like, you know, 100% learning, but things that I think are obvious are not obvious to other people. So, you mean, so
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, I love you. Thank you very much for doing this. I'm going to post on my IG enough. Bye. Love you. Bye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.